right, it says you are live.
Awesome, very good, thank you. Today is February 1st, 2021. It is the Victor Zoning Board of Appeals. I'd like to call the meeting to order, and we'll start with the pledge. Pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America, to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Right. Okay, thank you. All right. We have the minutes from the last meeting, January 19th, 2021. We get a motion for approval.
I'll
Thanks,
make that
Andrew.
motion.
I'll
Thank you,
second.
Donna.
Yep.
I'll second it.
Thank you, Fred. Any discussion on the minutes?
No.
Good. Okay, all in favor? Aye.
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 Any opposed? Carried. Thank you. All right, we have three applications. William Irwin, Brent Jones and Lacey Pollock, and Patrick and Sarah Zano. That is the continuation from last meeting. So just a quick review for those that haven't been here before. The Zoning Board of Appeals will hear the application, give the applicant an opportunity to make the presentation. At that point, the board presumably will ask some questions. We'll circle back to the applicant to see if there's anything that they'd like to touch on or add anything further. During the course of the presentation, what we do ask is, especially since we are on a Zoom meeting, is to wait for the questions to be asked, and we'll wait for the responses to be given so we're not talking over each other and we can create a good record. If there's any time or an event that exhibits are being used, please do the best that you can to use compass directions or points that we all can refer to and say, well, if you see over here and over there, it's going to make it difficult to create a record. Certainly, if there's any questions along the way, feel free to ask. So we'll start with the William Irwin application. I know I saw him here someplace. There you are. You're in the middle. You're in the center square for me. Okay, so your application is a fence on the north and south lot lines. You are the fence application, right?
Correct, yes.
Okay. And from what I gather, that your neighbor to the north, this would be 6399, has an existing fence. And your neighbor to the south, that would be 6403, has an existing fence.
Correct,
And what you're proposing here is your fence to then be connected to the neighbor to the north and to the neighbor to the south. Is that right?
Correct,
Okay.
yes.
So I don't want to step on your toes. So if you'd like to make your presentation, and then we'll circle around and ask you some questions about it.
Sure, absolutely. So, I mean, obviously our intent, as you stated, was to fence in our backyard. We're trying to do this at the same time while maintaining the aesthetics of the property in the neighborhood, because the two houses to the north and the one to the south all have fences, and the two to the north already connect their fences. So we're doing this, obviously we want to keep our pets and our kids safe and on our property. We have a 5 and a 3-year-old, I'm sorry, and 2 small dogs. So we're just really trying to find a way to keep them in, and also so that it looks nice, because we wouldn't be able to get the desired outcome, you know, without attaching to the fences from the corner of our house to theirs, because they'd be leaving like a 1-foot gap on the one side, and on the other side, a 3-foot gap that tapers to 1 foot. I think it's like 3.5 feet, maybe somewhere in that range. You know, ultimately, that's really all we're looking to do. You know, it's going to require us to cross over the property lines. However, we're looking to put the final post on ours and then just have it extend over and just connect with just mere bolts to theirs. So it could be taken down if needed. pretty straightforward. No, like I said, the other properties in the neighborhood are currently connected. That keeping this, pattern would make the neighborhood look nicer. I see it as a small variance. I don't know, obviously I've never done one of these before, so I don't really know, but it seems like a pretty small ask. That small gap, it's going to be really unpleasing to the eye. It's also going to be impractical for my neighbor to be able to maintain a 1 foot gap in between the two fences if we had to box in the entire fence or the entire backyard. And that's going to collect leaves, garbage, debris, weeds are going to grow in there. So yeah, I mean, that's really what we're asking for. Any questions?
Yeah, so let me at least try and get some clarification on this so we're all on the same page. You are proposing to construct two sections of fence, both running north and south. One's going to be at or about where your house is, the back end of your house, correct?
Yep.
And then further to the east, you'd like another section of fence that again is going to run north and south that will propose, or at least you're proposing to connect to your neighbor's fence as well. So far,
Correct.
so good?
Yep.
Okay.
Front.
So if
Be small.
we focus in on the, and I'm presuming here, but I just want to make sure I understand it. On the northwest corner, so this would be the fence line that's from your house to 6399.
Okay.
All right. How far over the lot line do you need that to connect?
63.99.
What I'm looking for is all four corners. How far do you have to go over the lot line on each of your neighbors?
So yes, the largest one is about 4 feet, based off of what the contractor could see from the what's it called, the survey.
Mhm.
And then that same side in the back is about 2 feet, and
I'm
then
sorry,
the other
2 feet?
Yep. So it tapers back to the corner of the property lines. And then the other side is anywhere between 18 inches and 2 feet on the front and the back.
All right, so if we just, for the argument's sake, round it up just to get a general idea, 2 feet on the southwest corner, 2 feet on the southeast corner, correct?
Correct. Yep.
And about 2 feet on the northeast corner and about 4 feet on the northwest corner.
Correct. Yes.
Okay. Now, before we get into the weeds too much on it, and so that we're clear, there is a principle that must be followed, that when variances are granted, they run with the land. So that means any variance that's granted on your property will run on your property. But even though it sounds like you have a small ask, what you are proposing is a variance to be granted on somebody else's property. And that's going to be, I think, the big rub on how do you make that happen. So arguably, we've had fence applications before that go all the way to the lot line, and there's arguments for and against it, and sometimes those are granted as zero variances, that it goes in all the way to the lot line. That potentially, and that's arguably can be done, but to encroach a variance onto somebody else's property is going to be difficult to justify and granting it. All right. So even though there's some discussion about, well, my neighbors say it's okay to do that, in theory, that they would need a variance to go from their fence to your fence for a zero variance on both sides of your fence. So this has to be, I think, a combination of a variance for you, a variance for your neighbor is 6399, and a variance for 6403. Now, that's how I see it. So I'd like to hear what the rest of the board has to say, but those are my concerns about granting a variance onto somebody else's property. Okay, so Matt, you have any thoughts on this?
Yeah, I mean, I had the exact same, I guess, thought process. Because this is probably the first time I've seen this come up in my 15 years on the board. I was going to ask Al, is there some other way that homeowners have been working with you to do something similar on the code enforcement side? This has to have come up before.
The one I can think of, they actually put a post. It was like a farm that was carving out an acre, and the fence post went through the property. So they actually broke the fence, put a post at each 1 inch on each side of the property line, and then connected a fence from there. So essentially, the fence did not cross the lot line. It actually ended at the lot line, or 1 inch from it.
So I had a 1 inch gap.
Yeah, 2 inches,
That's
but
what the code allows up to 1 inch for.
one inch on each side. Yeah.
Yeah, that's the main challenge I see is there's really, I think, 3 different properties that need variances on this. It's probably not necessarily, it's probably just more of my opinion. I think going 4 feet, 2 to 4 feet over the lot line, just kind of opens itself up. Maybe not necessarily now, but down the road when homeowners change and people try to sell houses and get surveys, I think it may open Pandora's box down the road for you. I'm not sure how relevant that is for the discussion here, but I think it is something to think about. Have you considered? Oh, go ahead.
We're not putting any permanent fixtures on their property. Does that matter? I mean, it can all be taken down if.
Well, I
So
mean,
what?
anything can be taken down. I think at the end of the day, if it's a post that goes in the ground, it would be a structure.
There's not going to be a post in
There's no
their on
post.
their land, not on their land. No.
Al, is the reason for the
Yeah.
request for the variance is the fence is crossing the lot line. Or let me rephrase it, it's within the 1 foot permissible zone for a fence.
The fence is allowed to go up to within 1 inch of the lot line.
1 inch.
And there's another section of the code also says the fence shall not go on another person's property. Just to add in, if you got a chance to read my referral, I did consult with the town attorney. If the variance were granted, it should have an agreement between the neighbors, and that should get filed in Ontario County.
I understood that piece of it, but what concerns me is, and I don't mean to fight attorneys, that the variance is going to create and encroach onto the neighbor's property. And I understand the piece about on the north end of the applicant's property, that arguably the applicant is going to be using 2 to 4 feet of the neighbor's property uncontested, if you will. So that's I think an entirely different problem, that if those neighbors agree to say, hey, you can use 2 feet of my property, okay, that's one thing. But I don't know how this board can grant the variance that encroaches onto somebody else's property. And I think we've held a pretty bright line, especially going into right-of-ways. So this is even beyond a right-of-way. This is somebody else's property. And I don't think this board can grant a variance onto somebody else's property.
I agree. My recommendation would be to take a look at it, talk to the homeowners, and if nobody wants to move fences, then I think my opinion is the property lines, which you change the property lines, move the property line to, outside of this board. But I agree with Mike. I think there's probably a better way to do it than variances.
I don't know. I think there is a way if the fence post on the applicant's property is within 1 inch of his property line, and then the neighbor would need a variance to connect his fence to the post and all the way around and continuing around that way.
But either way, to your point, he's still going to encircle a he's gonna claim 2 by 4, 4 feet on one end and 2 by one end is gonna be on his side of the fence.
Right, but that's, he doesn't need a variance for that.
I know, but
fence-
what you just said is that,
The sections of the fence that are at issue are on the northwest, northeast, southwest, and southeast corners of his property. It's not running east and west. Because the sections of the fence that need the variance are at the corners of where his proposed fence is, the northwest, the northeast, southeast, southwest corners.
right,
By,
but running east and west is gonna be the neighbor's property on his side of the fence.
correct, if he puts a post on his property, 1 inch from his property on those corners, then he doesn't need a variance. But
Correct.
if he wants that fence and enclosure, he's gonna need cooperation from his neighbors. It's $63.99 to get a variance connecting their fence to his fence. And so it's 6403.
Can I ask
I
a
think-
question?
Well, nobody
Sure.
needs a variance if they stay an inch from the property line, right? That's what Al's strategy does, is if everyone stays an inch from their property line, nobody needs a variance.
Right, but I think what he's trying to do is not have to put a fence east and west and leave that small gap in between his neighbors. He's only looking at 2 sections of fence. By putting the post in, he's gonna have to spend more money and run 2 more sections. That's more than.
Yeah, I'm not recommending, I'm not saying he needs to run 2 more sections of fence. But if he puts those posts in, let's just say that 1 inch from each of the corners of his property line. On one end, he's gonna have a 2-foot gap between where he puts his post and the neighbor's fence, going perpendicular to the one he just put in. The other end is gonna be 4. The neighbor can then again extend their side up to 1 inch of his post, and yeah, to Al's point, you're gonna have a technically a 2-inch gap in between it, and that would be a code compliant solution.
Right,
Now, he's
Donna?
still gonna have that whole 2 by 4 foot section of property that now he can claim that's on his side of the fence, because the fence isn't moving.
right, okay. Donna, you had a question?
Yeah, he said all the neighbors have fences like this. What did they do, Al?
At 6403, they don't have a fence permit, therefore it didn't come in for variance. But they may be visiting you shortly.
Okay. So that's there's only 3 fences in that development?
I didn't take
Okay.
I
Okay,
didn't go through the whole development looking.
okay,
I was aware that there's one at 6403 connecting to 6405, I believe.
okay.
I'm looking at an aerial, there's a few fences in that neighborhood, but I'm not seeing any fences that are proposed to be connected like the applicant wants.
Okay, that's what I was wondering, what they, okay,
6403 and 6405 are connected.
but 6403 does not have a variance to be connected or a fence, right?
Correct.
Okay. Thank you.
Fred, do you have any questions?
Well, I wondered how the fence could cross, and I think Al's got a solution. Is there any factor by granting this that we're implying permission for the applicant to use the property on the other side of the line?
I think that's an apples and orange problem. Even if the fence wasn't there and the applicant or the neighbors had some agreement that they could use each other's property, cross that that imaginary line, they're still using the property. The problem, I think, at hand is granting a variance on property that is not the applicant's. I think there are occasions it does happen that neighbors agree to either share or use the property, and they file some type of agreement with the county and say, this is how we want it, and we're okay with it, and press forward. But I think we're going to get into a boondoggle if we start granting variances on other people's property.
No, I agree. I think at the end of the day, the code allows them to go up to 1 inch. So the only thing we can really do is give him another inch and allow him to go right up to his property line. I don't know how we allow him to go over.
I agree with that.
If he stayed an inch away, he doesn't need a variance.
Correct.
Exactly.
That's a pretty simple way to do it.
Sarah, you have any questions?
No, no questions. I just agree with the statement that you've already made, Mike, about not sure how the zoning board is able to grant a variance for a fence on someone else's property other than the applicant. So that is a huge ask, and the way the application is presented as it is, I would not be in favor of.
Mr. Irwin, anything you want to add, or we got some options here. If you think you have some other solutions and discuss them now, if you want to, we can table it and come back for the next meeting, or we can make a decision. But I just legally, I don't know how we can do this. And I get it. It's a simple sounding ask, and it sounds logical as far as the economic piece of it and looks wise, aesthetics. But sometimes law doesn't always work that way. And following the code, that's how the code is written. We can't just rewrite the code or rewrite the law and allow variance to be encroaching on other people's property. So what would you like to do? Do you want us, we can give you more time if you need it. We can decide on it today if you like. You can withdraw it. There are some consequences to both. If we decide, that means you can't apply for a variance for some time. If you withdraw it, you can circle back. I don't want to start giving you legal advice on how to handle it, but there are consequences from having a decision today and it being negative, which it sounds like this board is inclined to do. Withdrawing it is going to have other consequences. If you need to seek legal advice, you can do that.
So, I'm sorry, I guess I'm a little confused. What consequences in regards to?
Consequences meaning that, again, the board really should not be giving you legal advice as far as, and when I say the consequences, well, what happens if the board decides on a variance and is denied, as opposed to if you decide to withdraw it, your ability to make another application, as opposed to, and we have before, the applicant says, gee, I'd like a little more time to think about this. Can we come back the next meeting? Because I think I got some other ideas or more information before I decide one way or the other, so I don't create a bigger problem for myself than what it already looks like it is.
I guess ultimately, it seems like there's really only one solution. That would be having us run our fence up to the code, and then potentially having the neighbors do the same thing on their side. So, I guess that's probably the only route we can go at this point.
Right. So, right. If you can arguably, no one would need any variances if you put your fence post on all your corners within 1 inch of your property line. And then your neighbors to the north and south do the exact same thing and extend the fence up to where their posts are. That would leave, I know, 2 posts that may be a bit unsightly, but you have 1 inch between those 2 posts, and you get what you want, a little more yard, less expense to putting in fence around all 4 corners as opposed to just 2. All right, but I think if you talk it over with your neighbors, I think you should be able to solve the problem of what you're trying to do without the need for variances. And without having to put in
Okay.
fence on to the north and south of you.
Yeah, that makes sense.
So what, do you want us to make a decision? Do you want to withdraw it? Do you want to think about it? What would you like to do?
I guess at this point, then it seems like it probably makes the most sense to just withdraw the variance request. I think, right? I mean, is that, that I know you said you can't give legal advice, but that seems to make the most sense if we're
It's-
not asking for a variance anymore.
Right, it's probably going to give you some more options, but I think that way, and I think you've heard the board, I think give you some guidance, if you will. You can do what you will, do what you want, but you should be able to solve the problem without variances.
Okay.
All right, so
Yeah.
you can withdraw that?
Let's just withdraw it.
Okay. Where are you? Sue, or is it Kim? Kim, does he need to make a formal letter to the zoning board to withdraw it?
I was going to say no, but Al, since you're here, do you know Al?
Probably to send you an email or letter, either one, as long as it's in writing.
All right, could you do that, Mr. Irwin? Just
Send
Yeah,
an
no.
email?
Yeah, I've been communicating with Kim through emails,
Good.
so not a
great. Okay, very good. Then we're going to consider that withdrawn. Any other questions?
No, I don't believe so.
Okay, good. Thanks so much for your time. I appreciate it.
Thank you.
Okay. Next, Brent Jones and Lacey Pella for, looks like a new build for 6485 Break of Day. Looking for 18.5 feet from the right of way from the road when the code requires 40 feet. Who's making the presentation?
Good evening, Al LaRue, McMahon LaRue Associates.
Hello, Al.
Hello. We've been out for about a year, and the biggest hurdle that we've had to get over was perk tests.
Protests?
Perk tests for a septic system. The owners were told that, and they bought the property based on the fact that there were some preliminary perk tests, but we found no evidence of it. And when we were out, we dug about 40 holes, believe it or not, to try to get percolation rates acceptable. And we did find 2 holes that were acceptable and witnessed by the town engineer. He mentioned to us that while we were out there, that he did have another appointment to witness some perk tests, but the engineer or surveyor didn't show up. So there were no official perk tests for that. We looked all over the place, found 2, and then we designed a system that went to New York State Health. They denied it, the location of it, because the 20-foot taper went a little bit into and it was just a taper into the gravel path. And there were some steeper slopes along that side that they took exception with. So we applied for a variance for separation distances and excessive slope and that sort of thing, and they were denied. So it left us with only one solution. We put the septic system where it needs to go. We've done a topographic survey and a property boundary survey. And we have 20 feet from the house to the septic system. That leaves us with 18 and a half feet, 18.6 roughly from the right-of-way line. Probably another, if you go to the edge of pavement, you're probably looking at about another 15 feet. So from visually the road, we're about, maybe 30 feet off the road. But unless we can get, there's two movable objects. One is the 40-foot front setback and the other is the state health. And I think this hardship is pretty real. It's a small lot, certainly a beautiful lot in that there's definitely a home for this site would be terrific. The trail runs right behind it. We have the trees that you see there that are outlined in red. The house is going to be pretty well buffered from the neighbor to the, where's north? I forgot after all these years, our neighbor to the east. So it's not a heavily traveled road. It's not a county road. It's a town road. I think it could be quite quaint, but that's what caused us to ask for a variance, which is really our only solution at this point to developing the lot. If this fails, essentially this is an undevelopable lot, and that's not a good result. In my 56 years, I've never seen anything quite like this. I've never had perk tests fail. This came as close as I've ever had. When you dig 40 holes, wow, there's underlying problems in the soil, so it's a raised fill. It's a raised system. They're going to pump to it. But all in all, the location is phenomenal, no question about it. And with that, Brett's here, Lacey's here. They'd be glad to talk more about it. I can answer any questions you might have.
Sarah, you have any questions?
I don't right now.
Donna,
Nope.
Fred?
Well, all the houses on the relatively short road have a greater setback. The one at the corner of East Victor and Break of Day, it's an older house full of additions, and the last addition might be somewhere in this range, but the rest of the street is all set back.
We don't disagree.
As I tried to picture the house, it wasn't consistent with the rest of the neighborhood, put it that way. I wondered if it was a septic system that was causing the problem.
It is.
Yeah, I don't really have any questions other than it just seems like there'd be a way for the septic system to get put in, but it's not really a question, is it?
We've been doing months of back and forth with state health, and we've examined every possibility. And we're not new. This is not our first day at doing this, and it's just I've never seen anything quite like it. It's a perfect storm, if you will.
Yeah.
Matt, you have any questions?
yes, let's see. So are all of those homes on septic?
Yeah. There's no sewer on that road, I don't think.
Sewer would have solved the problem completely. No
There is-
question about that.
There's water.
So where do they park? So you're not gonna drive over the septic, obviously. Where's the proposed,
There's a driveway shown on the plan. Comes off Break a Day Road.
that
The
must be
septic
looking
is
at the-
behind the house, behind the proposed house.
Let me just switch files here that I'm looking at.
There you are.
Gotcha. The other one was. Okay, how far is that field from the Auburn Trail? Approximately.
About 10 feet. Just down at the corner of that. Now the septic has to be parallel with the contours. So the corner of that septic system is just down off the bank, which is what the health department had the complaint about the steep slope. There's a bank off of the trail. And so we had to move the septic down so that it was off the trail. And so it's still only about 10 feet away, it's a small little slope, but still it was greater than health department would allow, and they won't give us a waiver.
And there is no,
Could
there's
the
no,
trail,
there's no anything you're impacting regarding the trail.
No, it won't impact the trail at all.
could the trail be moved back to the rear of the lot? As part of this work?
Wow,
I was just trying to make sure that there wasn't an
It's on an
for
easement
the
right
trail
now.
to exist. So you're not encroaching on easement.
No, we're not encroaching on it. The trail's in an easement right now.
I have a suggestion. Would it be worth putting in some stakes that are 3-4 feet high at the corners of the house?
Sure.
So the board could connect it to the rest of the road.
Yeah, we could do that. That's easy.
You done, Matt?
Yeah, I think I'm okay for now.
All right. So the house that's to the east, do you know where their septic system is?
I do not.
Because I think part of what Fred and some of us have a curiosity, it's like, well, how come some of these houses then can be in compliance with the code, have a septic system, and arguably have, especially the house to the east, it's about the same size. And they're able to have a septic system and have a house in compliance with the code, but your client can't.
Well, that lot itself is 1.7 acres versus ours, which is quite a lot smaller. So they could have their septic to the east more, even on the east side of the lot, and still have enough room for their house and whatnot. And it could be pre-existing, I don't know when that house was built.
Okay. All right, so let's go back to the perk test that you said 40 were done.
We dug 40 holes. We found 2 that were acceptable.
And then you communicated that to the Department of Health?
Yes, we have.
All right.
The town engineer witnessed the perk test.
All right, so is there any verification of you submitting the proposal to Department of Health and it being denied?
Yes, we do. We've
Is that
got a
part of the
denial.
application?
Yes.
All right, but I must have skimmed over that.
We have an
Tim, is that in the
and a
application?
denial from the state health.
I didn't see it in the application either.
We submitted it on 9/21/2020. And it was denied.
No, I'm sorry. Let me rephrase the question. Was the denial from the Department of Health submitted to the Town of Victor Zoning Board of Appeals in this application?
I don't know if it was or not.
All right, because
Uh,
I think that's an important piece for us to take a look at. And right now, all that we have is, and I know you've been in the business for a long time, but when we grant or deny variances, what we'd like to do is create a solid record on why it is we're doing either granting or denying. Do you have that available?
Yes, we do.
All right. So we may have to table this until the next meeting, because I would like to see that on your efforts on communicating with Department of Health and it being denied, and the efforts that you have put forth digging the 4 holes and it only being 2 holes that were, if you will, acceptable. Because I think that's going to plug in, especially for the criteria about other alternatives or feasible methods here.
Right. Additionally, what we'll do is we'll stake 4 corners of the house so you can get a visual
Okay.
of where the house would be. We can do that too. So when is the next meeting? So I have a schedule.
It's March 1st. It's March 1st. Hey, Mike, this has to wait anyway because it went to the county because of its proximity to the town-owned land, that trail.
Okay.
So it was tabled. Their meeting is let's see. Their meeting is the 10th of this month, and our next meeting is the 1st of March.
Great. So, Mr. LaRue, how much further from the right of way could that house get without, if you will, encroaching into the septic system?
Right now, they need to be 20 feet apart. And they're exactly 20 feet apart right now.
Okay, so the position, that's what I'm driving at. So
Right.
the placement in your professional opinion for the septic system and the placement, proximity of the placement to the house is as close as it's going to get.
That's
There
correct.
are really no other alternatives on septic system
No other
of the house.
alternative.
Okay. As a reminder, and I think you do know this, looking at the code, should this board grant the variance, and it sounds like there is the garage is going to be built in the future.
That's correct.
All right, it can't be forward of the house. But your clients know that?
We know that.
Okay, all right. All right. And I don't think, as far as I think Fred's thought, on moving I suppose the trail, I don't think that could ever happen. Al, is that the town's trail?
It is.
The town has an easement for it. I think I'd suggested that back when this went before the planning board originally, and I don't think there's any response or didn't entertain the discussion at all.
Yeah, I think that's a bunch of legal fees to try and change the right of way, change the path. I think the better look at this is we'll see what the county planning board has to say. And I think if we can get some verification from the Department of Health that there's no other place for the septic system to go but for where Mr. LaRue has proposed it to be, I think that's going to help us out quite a bit.
Kim, I'll send the information off to you.
Okay, yes, that sounds good.
Does anyone else, Sarah, Donna, Fred, Matt, any other questions?
No,
Great. Mr. LaRue, anything for us?
No, I'm all set. If going to the county, that seems to be not an issue anymore. I was concerned about it before because it seemed like a local matter, but if county-owned land, town-owned land has to go, it has to go.
Correct. Al, anything else you want to add to this?
I don't have anything, no.
Okay, great. All right,
Could I add something as the builder?
sure.
I do know the lot next door to it, which would be on the, west side was just purchased if you're facing a lot. I believe that was just bought last
Just
month
to the east.
or to the east. Has anyone applied for any kind of permit on that? I'm just curious to see what they're gonna have to do with the trail and their system, because that's about the same size lot.
Are you talking about the house immediately to the east, existing?
No, the lot that was for sale would be on the west side if you were facing the house.
Okay. I don't believe that's been sold as of yet. It's going through the planning board. At this point in time, it's just for exchange of property.
Okay, because basically this is, I've been with them for the past 2 years with this going on. We've jumped through every hoop here, and I understand it's got to go through the county, but basically at this point, if this doesn't work, that lot right there is just a parking lot. The town should buy it from them.
Well, going back to the lot to the west, it's also part of a potentially future endeavor if the golf course were to go under for a subdivision, in which case they would probably run sewer down that road, down Break a Day to join into that. But that doesn't help you at this point, but.
No, because there is a 12-inch main that runs down through there, but that comes from the mall, so we can't tie into that.
Any other
So that's-
questions?
Nope, that was basically my biggest thing. They've just been on the go for this for 2 years, and we're just trying to get down to the point. Do we stay there or do we just jump ship to another town? Unfortunately.
Well, I think we need a few more pieces to the puzzle here and see what we can do with it.
The location
you.
is phenomenal. I keep saying it. I've never seen such a nice location that's been so difficult.
Okay, I think we're all set for now. So
Great.
we will take a look at this on March 1st.
March 1st, you got it. Thank you.
Thanks so
Thank you.
much. Okay, Patrick and Sarah, thanks for being patient.
Hi, everyone. Thanks for
Hello,
having
hello,
us back.
hello. All right,
Okay, so
Uh,
we took all your recommendations and your advice into consideration, and we were able to fine tune our proposal a little bit and include a few more details in our application, which, if it's okay with you, I will share them with you now.
go right ahead.
Okay, so we specified our proposal a little bit more to give us actual footage on the property. So we're proposing that the front line of a future main residence be allowed to be built at least 1 foot behind the front line of the existing barn. According to my measurements, the existing barn is 100 feet from the road. I know Al provided a really old survey, or it might have been the building permit for the barn, and it said 120 feet. I didn't get 120 feet, but I'm also not a surveyor, so we'll take that with a grain of salt. But between 100 and 120 feet is where the barn sits from the road. So we're asking that the future house just be built at least 1 foot behind the front there. So I want to also consider the following factors. The main residence behind the accessory structure would not produce an undesirable change in the neighborhood. We kind of talked a lot about this last time. There is an existing barn in front of the house at 1200 Strong Road, which is south of this property. And there's also at 8032 Taylor Road, there was a more recent structure, a detached garage built in front of a home there, which went through this zoning board. In addition, several neighbors voiced their opinion on last time's call. I won't list all their names here, but there was 3 that were in support of our building going behind the barn. We kind of looked more closely at some things, some other methods to show that the benefit sought cannot be easily achieved otherwise. And one of the things we did a lot of research on, which you also asked us to do, was what would be the cost or the effort to move the barn. So we did not have someone come over and quote and do this because we don't own the land. And in our opinion, that would be a waste of our resources and money. But I did do some research online and found that because of its size, the barn is 40 feet by 43 feet and then 18 high at its peak. You couldn't move it, obviously, without disassembling it and rebuilding it. The other issue is that it has a concrete slab, so that would have to be demolished and then rebuilt in the new location at a cost for that size of approximately $10,000. So in our opinion, that's not reasonable. And because it's in such good shape, aside from needing a little paintwork on the outside and some cleanup, it's a good barn. So the other option obviously would be to build the house next to or in front of the barn. It would still be able to sit back that 40 feet from the road, but in our opinion, that's just not a good use of the resources since we have 8.5 acres. And the point for us is to be in a more rural setting where the house is set back further on the property. In our opinion, the variance request is not substantial. It does not affect other neighbors. It doesn't go into another neighbor's yard or go anywhere near their property line. And also the actual footage that we're requesting, if the house was built right at code, it would have to be 40 feet off the road line. The barn is 100 feet off the road line, and we're asking for just 1 foot behind that. So we're asking for at least a 61-foot difference. And on an 8.5 acre lot, we don't think that's substantial. I believe we had feedback from the conservation board showing that I think it was in this meeting, it could have been the subdivision meeting though, there were no concerns in regards to the environment. And then we are asking for the variance request based on an existing structure. It was not a self-created issue, except that we eventually want to build a house. So I feel like we covered everything you guys asked for last time, but we are ready for more questions, so.
Wow, well, we're not going to keep you all night.
There's not a whole lot else to do nowadays, so.
I appreciate you doing your homework. Nice job.
Thanks.
I want to at least touch on the Hankey variance on Taylor Road.
Yeah.
I took a look at the aerial. I went and reviewed the variance itself. I think that one is in apples and oranges. It had to do with the position of the house and the garage itself.
Okay.
It's, if you look at the aerial and you look at the survey, it's almost like at a 45-degree angle from the road.
Yeah, I drove
Just by
past it the other day.
Yeah, just by circumstance, if you will, how the house was built in the first place, where the driveway is, and then the garage being next to it, created that illusion, if you will, that it's closer to the road. Well, in fact, it is, and it's 150 feet off the road, so that helps. Doesn't mean it hurts your cause. At least it's different.
Okay.
I think it's very telling, and I agree with you. Trying to move that barn is going to be extremely costly, if not impossible to do it. I suppose if you really, really wanted to do it, people have done things like that before, then you have at it, but it doesn't sound very practical to it.
No.
I also took a look at the site plan review, planning board minutes, and it seemed to be their biggest concern was not really your lot, but lot 2 in the site distance.
Driveway.
Right. So I don't think you're going to have the problem. Let me ask you this. Are you going to keep the driveway for where the barn is currently? Or are you going to make a new driveway for the house?
So right now where that dirt driveway is, it actually doesn't have a good sight line. I know that it's existing and so it had to have been approved. I mean, a business ran out of there. I would assume it was approved. So it's definitely a possibility. Ideally, I think in our minds, we'd like to drive in that driveway and go, left into the barn and then a little bit up further to the house and the garage, kind of using them interchangeably. But technically the driveway could be put up the road further away from the hill. So south on the property line, I guess if we really needed it, a couple
Yeah.
feet, but we haven't, it's existing. So we've just sort of been working off of that.
Yeah, and I would think once you decide, and presuming that you get the variance and you purchase the property and all those good things, and you go through the fine tune of, oh, this is where we like to put the house.
Right.
And I think planning board is probably gonna weigh in at closer on, yeah, you can put the driveway there, no,
Right.
you're creating a problem. So and I think looking at this, especially with having the house, behind the barn and is what you really want to do.
Mhm.
And I think going through the criteria, some people think that it's an all or nothing type where you have to hit all those criteria. It's not, it's a balancing. So as we go through it, I don't want you to feel like you're alarmed all of a sudden saying, well, hold on, why are you saying that we're losing on that one? It's not fatal to your case. It's a balancing. Some factors are more important to the board than others. So as we're going through that, I don't want you to be too alarmed by what it sounds like.
Okay.
But overall, I think I'm encouraged with, your homework and what I saw from the planning board. But before we continue, I think, Matt, do you have any thoughts or questions about this?
We'll definitely be getting a perk test before we purchase the land.
Okay.
Tonight.
Just throwing that out there.
So
Anna, you had a question? You have your finger up.
Yeah, I do. Did we get any other correspondence from anybody for pro or con for this on the road?
I haven't seen anything, no.
Okay, thank you.
Sure.
Matt,
yeah, just on the numbers. So you said you wanted the variance to be at a minimum of 1 foot
Behind the front line of the barn.
behind.
So that
Where-
kind of gives us a minimum, but it gives us leeway. If it were to be further back, it would be further back, but at
Right,
least.
right. So how far back do you think you're really going to go? I mean,
So-
I'm okay with.
No,
where
I
we-
no, I understand what you're asking. I
But-
think
Put some
and
down.
maybe, I think Al could probably answer this question. I have the number somewhere, but there is a distance back in which you require a sprinkler system. If you're so far back and a certain thing has to be in your driveway, I think it's like
I think it's 250 or something like that.
50, I
50
think.
feet. Oh, I had
Right.
it. So it wouldn't be more than that is our plan.
And what's our number? Is the variance for the maximum or is it for the minimum? Mike,
I think what we're looking at is,
a variance not to exceed 250 feet, or is it a variance that just allows the house to be 1 foot or more?
Because
I-
then it would meet
I think
code.
I think what we ought to look at it, that if the applicant at some point decides like, well, gee, we want to put the house even with the barn, even if it's, I'm not looking like the compass direction, even if it's
I think that's allowed.
40 feet, 100 feet away from the barn, but it's no further, if you will, behind the barn. I think now that they have so much room and the site plan, I think, was up in the air to such a degree. I didn't really know what the concerns were from the planning board.
In that scenario, in our mind, that would be within code then, that we wouldn't need a variance. If it was in line with the front of that barn, we're not violating anything. That's why we're asking for the home structure to be 1 foot behind the front of the existing barn,
At least.
because that requires us to have the variance. Knowing that we're most
Knowing we
likely,
want
we're
it
gonna
back there.
put it much further back than that.
Right, but,
And were you saying from the subdivision
all right, so.
application there was a question?
So it sounds like there's two questions in there. Even if you have a variance, that allows you to build the house behind the barn doesn't necessarily mean, though, that you have to do it.
Right.
But by you offering, say, we will put the house at least 1 foot behind the barn, it puts a condition on to the variance that you may or may not want.
Well,
You-
what if, I mean, in my
You're-
proposal, it says that the front line of a future main residence be allowed to be built. It doesn't say will be built. So I don't know if that language or if the language in the approval would need to be tweaked.
I think it's more along the lines of that the variance will allow the barn to be up to, let's say, 200 feet in front of where you place the house. You know you're not going to move the barn, and then you can kind of do the math, right? That
Mhm.
you're allowed to then put the house 200 feet, I'll just use 200, or 200 feet behind it, all the way up to where it's allowed to by code, in line with it or not. I think if we flip it around and say that the variance is to allow the barn X number of feet forward of the front line of your house, you just got to make sure that the number you give us, whether it's 200, 250,
Right.
you're not going to exceed, right?
Right.
I think that's right. I agree. If you
So
flip
if
it
the
around the
number
other
is
way,
250, because you don't want to have the sprinkler system and all that, I totally agree.
now,
I would make it 250 for purposes of our discussion, and assuming the
Right.
rest of the board is okay with the number. But
that's going to give you more latitude then to decide really where you want to put the house
Right.
on all that land.
So what if we said, my only concern with that, and just based on the people who went prior to us, is we say 250, but because, now obviously we're gonna have a perk test done before we purchase the land because it hasn't been required thus far in the subdivision process. What if for some reason the septic needs to go smack
Well,
dab where we
obviously,
want the house, and we actually have to do a sprinkler system because we want to be back instead of in front of it, then does this limit us from doing that?
I think in that case, you then have to you'd be back in front of us with more data that shows, hey, we didn't ask for enough.
Okay.
I can't believe that you won't be able to find a spot for your septic system. I've forgotten.
Right. I mean, I can't either, but just to cover my bases.
Your proposed piece of property is a bit larger than the last application.
Right.
That's true. That's true.
Well, I guess that's why our thought process is if we say that a house could be built 1 foot behind the front of that, we could take it, the barn is 100, we could put the house 101 feet off the road, or we can put it 600 feet off the road.
Right.
And
And it
we're-
would have to
and-
still meet code, obviously, in the site development application and the building process.
That's how we were thinking about it, that as long as we have a variance to at least build a structure that is behind the front line of the barn, we can accomplish what it is that we're looking for.
Fine, okay, all right.
Is that, are we looking at it wrong? I know you mentioned the other way, but now that gives us much more flexibility than trying to figure out something that we don't know yet due to variables that we haven't identified.
Yeah, it may. We normally don't think in terms of minimums. We mostly think in terms of maximums.
Okay.
Maybe that's why. But I'm not against it if we think it makes more sense in this case.
Right. In my head, like the maximum, we could only go so far as all the other codes would allow us when you're doing a site development and building plan. So we couldn't, without another variance, go so far that we're, on the other end of our property.
Al, not to put you on the spot, but I'm gonna. Do you see any problems with a condition, presuming that the variance is granted, for the house to be at least 1 foot behind the existing barn?
I don't see any problem with that. Just sounds funny.
It does.
It definitely does.
It does sound fun.
I rewrote that sentence like 17 times. I was like, this does not sound right.
It just seems to me if the board's inclined, you would grant the variance for the house to be behind the barn. And then in your condition, not in your conditions, but in your findings, that the applicant has indicated that they would like to build it at least 1 foot and probably no more than 250 or 300 feet to support your decision. But that's
I
just
mean,
my,
do we need a number? Can we just say
I don't think so.
that we give the applicant the ability to build their home wherever they want, as long as they're obeying all the other codes?
Yeah, I think so. I think that's the way to do it, and not make it a condition, but make it a factor as far as the criteria that we're looking at, and plug it in that way. So at least it's in the record on how it is that we came about making the decision.
Right.
I think if you put it in the criteria and say in the criteria you said 250 feet, and for some reason they find they need to go back 350, I think you can still make a case to bring it back to you to decide whether that's needs to be reconsidered or not.
All right, well, let's hold on to that thought a second. Fred, questions, concerns?
I don't have any concerns. There's several barns on that road that are hit in front of the house. One of them, very much like this, an old barn. I think Reese's lived there, with a modern house behind it. Very much like this, much more appropriate or applicable than the Hayco property is. Whatever you guys decide, I'm going to vote for it.
Sarah, questions?
No, I just wanted to thank the applicants for going back and answering all the questions that we had from a couple weeks ago. So I think that helps make the decision going forward.
Thank you.
Donna, questions?
No, nothing. Thank you.
Great. Anything else you want to add, Sarah?
Nope. Oh.
There's a couple.
Well, I mean, I'd ask Patrick, but you don't say much. I'd say.
Well,
I don't let him talk.
We went over this last time, that she's gonna take care of
I'm in
this.
charge here.
Oh, boy.
I told him he has to just go watch the YouTube stream.
I do have
Wow.
I do have one thought.
Go ahead.
The barn. It looks very commercial or industrial now. And I think the approval should require that the walls get painted some kind of a earthy forestry type color, maybe a tree put on each corner to make it look more residential.
Oh, that's
Done.
happened.
Wow.
First, we're gonna get the hot tubs removed, and then we'll
There's a lot
paint
of stuff.
it.
Yeah, that we'll take care of that for sure.
It's gonna look
We'll leave
beautiful.
aesthetics up to you.
We will take care of that for sure.
Okay. All right. So that being said, let's run through the criteria and see if we can get Patrick on his way to whatever it is he'd like.
I gotta put my boys to bed soon.
Okay. Good.
Okay, that's my job.
All right. First criteria, whether an undesirable change will be produced in the character of the neighborhood or detriment to nearby properties created by the granting of the area variance. I think it will not, with the thought that as we've heard that there are in this rural area that there are some barns forward of homes, and also reviewing the town planning board minutes, the focus seems to have been on the site distance concerns for lot number 2 and not this proposed lot number 3. Also looking at, it looks like a zoning board of appeals survey map. Oh, I can't quite see what the date is on it, but it looks like from the center of Strong Road to the front of the barn looks to be about 120 feet. The applicant says that she measured it to be about 100. So with that, with the house potentially being behind the barn, and especially the property being the size that it is, there doesn't give me any concerns. Also, the septic concerns about allowing flexibility. Would anyone else like to add anything else on the first criteria? All right. Second, whether the benefits sought by the applicant can be achieved by some other method feasible for the applicant to pursue other than an area variance. In this case, because there is 100 to 120 feet from the road to the barn, potentially a house could be forward of the barn. However, given that the size of the property, it seems to be that the applicant should be permitted to put their house and use their property as they would like. Would anyone else like to add anything to the second criteria? Third, whether the requested area variance is substantial. It is arguably substantial simply because due to the size of the property and with at least 100 feet from the road to the barn, that in theory, the house could be put there. I know they don't want it there, but because of that simple fact, it is substantial. Would anyone like to add to the third criteria or make any comments to that? Fourth, being whether the proposed variance will create an adverse effect or impact on the physical and environmental conditions in the neighborhood or district. I think it is not, due to the size of the property and also the rural area, and that there are, again, other barns, that it doesn't appear that we've heard any evidence whatsoever that this proposed plan and this proposed variance will have any adverse effects on the physical and environmental conditions of the neighborhood or district. Would anyone else like to add anything else to the fourth criteria? Whether the alleged difficulty is self-created is the fifth criterion. The consideration is relevant to the decision of the board, but shall not necessarily preclude the granting of the area variance. Arguably, it is self-created. I would like to circle back, though, that there was some discussion. I want to be able to put it into, let's put it into the first criteria, that the proposed location of the home will be at least 1 foot behind the barn and no more than 250 feet. That doesn't necessarily mean that they are restricted to that area, but there was discussion on where they would like to put the proposed home. Anyone else like to add anything to the criteria that we went over, or any proposed conditions to the proposed variance? All right, hearing none, I'd like to entertain a motion for the granting of this variance.
I make,
Fred, all right, thank you, Fred. I need a second.
I'll second it.
Thank you, Donna. All in favor?
Aye.
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 Any opposition? None. Congratulations. Good luck to you.
Thank you.
Don't think you have to paint the barn like Fred said you had to. You paint it however you
I'm gonna
want.
call him for some interior design questions and get
You
his
know
input.
what? Go right ahead and put a paintbrush in his hand. He needs something to do.
Can
You're
I,
hired, Fred.
can I ask a quick question about the variance though?
I'd be careful now.
No,
Go ahead.
and we talked about this last time, is we're not the owners of the property right now. And you mentioned that it carries with the land. If for some reason this fell apart, the variance would not go through. Is that right?
Well, I think the way that,
just
as I understood it, you had permission to at least
You.
Yes.
We have
present it.
permission in the purchase agreement to do this.
Right. So I can't imagine how it would go sideways on you.
Right. Fair enough.
I-
But
I-
the variance is it's coming to us.
Or it sticks with the land, right?
It
Is it
stays
tied
with
to
the
the
land,
land or
right?
us?
Right. The way that its variances are, if you will, recorded, there's going to be a resolution that Kim puts together. I signed them, and then the town will have that on file, so the world knows,
Perfect.
no matter who owns that property, that this variance runs with
Okay.
lot number.
Lot number 3 of this minor subdivision.
Correct.
Fair enough. Okay, perfect.
Okay, good. You can go ahead and put the kids to bed now.
Thank you so much, guys.
Thank
You're
you so
welcome.
much.
Hold
It's
on,
hold
lovely
on.
to meet all of you.
You too.
Hold on a second.
All right.
Oh.
Stay well. Good luck.
Al had something.
Yes, I'll be-
Bill has a question.
Flag on
Uh,
the
I just want to advise the applicants that there is a time limit on variances at this point. You would have 1 year to act upon it. I understand you may have a longer time frame, but if you get near that point, you need to come back to the board and explain why you haven't been able to act upon it. And they
Okay.
can, at that point, extend it.
Okay.
Thanks, Al.
Thank you, Al.
Thanks, Al. Good point.
Appreciate it.
Thank you, everyone.
You're welcome. Have a good night.
Thanks. Have a good
Thanks.
night.
Bye.
All right. Anyone have anything else for the board tonight?
Nope.
All right. Hearing none. Motion to adjourn.
A second.
I'll make that motion.
Thank you. Thank you. All in favor? Aye.
Aye.